VGA, HDMI, HDBaseT, fibre, just some of the AV signal standards for transmitting audio-visual from your source to your display, but how far will each of these signal standards transmit your signals? HowToAV is joined by Dan today from CYP AV Experts to talk about all of these AV signals and what their distance limitations are. Dan, thanks for joining us once again at HowToAV. Well, let's start off with what's probably now a little bit of an old technology, but I'm amazed it's still really popular, which is VGA.
Yeah, you are right. VGA still has its place. Certain regions still use a lot of VGA, others have moved away now to other formats, but it is still there, it's still useful. So with VGA, realistically, you'll be looking at distances of up to around 30 meters. So it is an analog format, so of course the signal can degrade over long distance. But as I say, realistically, you'd be looking at around up to 30 meters with VGA before you have to think of some sort of extension.
Then we move on to what is absolutely the industry standard now, of course, which is HDMI in all its different formats.
That's right, yeah. So HDMI cables, as you say, it's the weapon of choice now, isn't it, for all connectivity, to be honest with you. So again, it depends really, there's variables here. What are you putting through the cable? And that's going to determine sometimes how long that signal can transmit. So if you look at, for example, a 1080p signal, you'd be looking at an HDMI cable transmitting that up to perhaps 15 meters or so, sometimes a little bit more, but around 15 meters at 1080p. Anything beyond that and you might start to suffer with maybe sparkles on screen or a few sort of issues here and there. So again, realistically, you want to keep that up to around 15 meters at 1080p. As you start to introduce things like 4K, what we'd call lower bandwidth 4K, like 4K 60/420 or 4K 30/444, again, that distance will come down a little bit because you're putting more information through the cable. So realistically, you'd be looking at around 10 meters or so, maybe a bit more at a push, but a 10-meter cable is then less likely to have any issues over longer distance. If you take another step up from that, you'd be looking at, for example, 4K 60/444. That's more information again through the cable. So that might then put you into sort of premium cable territory, premium certified as we call it. And the maximum distance we would go to as a manufacturer is 7 meters. Anything above that, again, it can be fine, but you might start to get a few issues with, as I say, longer distance and maybe sparkles on screen or something similar. So we would keep that sort of cable to around 7 meters or below.
What about extending HDMI signals with devices such as distribution amplifiers, Dan?
Yeah, there are ways you can do that. You can use HDMI repeaters, which basically one cable goes into a repeater and then goes out the other side. You can usually up that to maybe 5 meters or so either side of the extender. But with the other formats we have, you're probably less likely to do that now. If you need more than 7 meters, as we discussed with premium certified cables, you're likely to look at maybe active optical cables. So they're still HDMI, but instead of having a main copper connection between the two, they have an optical or fiber connection between them. So with our range, that would be either 10 meters or 20 meters with active optical cable, and they don't have to have separate power. That's why we keep them to up to 20 meters. The source, for example, and screens have the ability to output 5-volt power, and that's what our cables use in 10 and 20 meter to give it that power to transmit over the distance. So again, if you need more than the 7 meters, you might then look at an active optical cable to take you up to around 20 meters or so.
So active optical is starting to use fibre, but now let's talk about actual fibre cables themselves.
Yeah, so actual fibre, you're looking at transmission distances of up to around 30 kilometers, 30 kilometers. So obviously this is normally in a much more professional environment. It's not going to be used in the home unless it's a very, very large home. But as I say, that would normally be then with a transmitter unit of some sort of physical hardware transmitter. And they have what they call SFP modules, which is basically a fibre module. And depending on the combination of module and cable, depends on the distance you would get. So for example, with one of our fibre transmitters, out of the box, you'd be looking at about 300 meters transmission distance with the supplied fibre module and what we call OM3 fibre cable. If you upgrade the fibre cable to OM4, you'd be looking at distances of around 550 meters. And then if you actually change the plug-in fiber module, you could be looking at, as I say, 10 kilometers, 20, 30 kilometers. So again, if you need very, very long cable runs, you might then look at going for actual fiber technology.
So that's fibre. Now we can also talk about a standard Ethernet cable as well. There's a growing trend for sending AV signals over a standard Ethernet cable infrastructure, and one of the most popular in AV is HDBaseT.
That's right, yep, so HDBaseT has been with us for a while, and again, depending on what data you're trying to put through it, can give you basically certain distances you can achieve. So there are two formats of HDBaseT. There's HDBaseT Full, which is sort of the full signal version, and then there's HDBaseT Lite. So if we look at HDBaseT Lite, for example, with a 1080p signal over a Cat6a cable, you'd be looking at distances of up to around 60 meters. If you start to try and put some of the 4K formats through that distance would drop to around 40 meters. Again, that's with Cat6a or above. If you've got the full HDBaseT, then that can transmit distances up to 100 meters. Again, that's with Cat6a or above. So again, a 1080p signal or even some limited 4K signals can be transmitted up to 100 meters over Cat6a or above with an HDBaseT extender.
And then we've also got video over IP, which is different to over Ethernet, isn't it, Dan?
That's right. So video over IP is basically, well, AV over IP, should I say? It's audio and video. AV over IP works around a network switch, like a traditional computer type network switch. So you've got your transmitters, which would then connect to the network switch. That distance is up to 100 meters. And then from your network switch to your receiver is a further 100 meters. So with an AV over IP system, depending on obviously where they are all located, you could achieve up to 200 meters from transmitter to receiver.
So that gives us a great guideline as to the transmission distances of the various AV cable types. We've put together a blog with a wonderful chart that's going to help you with that. Dan, surely the simplest tip before running that cable through the building is to test it first, isn't it?
Yes, it is a very good idea to test your cabling. There are Cat testers on the market to test whether a Cat cable is working, and there are testers as well for example, HDMI. So we have one that tests an HDMI cable. So you physically connect the HDMI cable in and out of the tester, and it will tell you before you go and bury it in a wall or before you put it behind a rack, it will confirm for you whether that cable is working and passing the right data that you need it to. So you are right, check that your cables work before you install them, and of course check those measurements. Make sure that you've actually got the right cable length to get from source to screen.
Great tip from Dan there. Dan's going to join us again on HowToAV.tv with some great Q&As and some great top tips on audiovisual installation. So join us again very soon with Dan at HowToAV.tv.